Good morning, Chevra. It's great to be back and continue our conversation about vacation. And what we saw last time, as we opened up this topic, is that we saw how essential, how vital it is to get clarity about this topic of vacation. Because there is a reality, and the reality is that vacation is here. I mean, not just because I'm giving this class during the summer, but we, as the Jewish people and within the frum community, vacation has found its way in to our lifestyle, right? Depending on who you are, you may say it may have infiltrated, but it's here. Vacation is here. And there is an existence of two camps. Camp number one, which we had the opportunity last time to see, Mar Makomos, which explained it, which is the anti-vacationers, right? Anti-vacationers. We know that when it comes to Torah, when it comes not just to be subscribe to Judaism or Orthodoxy, but to be on the program of Avodas Hashem, right? It requires a deep commitment, right, to Torah. It requires a deep commitment to using every minute that we have to be able to connect. And as we saw, if we're not at work, or even when we're at work, right, we're thinking about, I want to get back to the base medrash. Kal v'chomer, even more so when we leave, that's where we're going to end up. And we saw this camp, which does not ebb out, let's just say, a positive energy about vacation. And then we saw camp number two. And camp number two, and we're familiar with camp number two, is a society which has embraced the vacation culture. It's embraced the vacation culture, and this is something we see, whether or not you've been on one of these vacations, right, or your friends have been on these vacations, or you're hoping you can go on one of these vacations, or you're wondering how could people go on such vacations. They exist. Right, we see advertisements for them, and there's a culture of glat, mahadrin, wherever you want, around the world, right, top cuisine, everything that you could ever desire in the realm of Gashmias, here for you, stamped kosher. And as honest and authentic, Avdei Hashem, you may have thought, or you may have wondered, is this what Hashem has in mind? Is this what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to be doing? And therefore, what we saw is the need for us to be able to understand this whole entire sugya. And while we do find, and it's an amazing thing that we find, I've seen a lot of it myself, questions that are addressed around the topics of vacations and halacha. Questions such as, what does a person do, right? You know, if he goes to a place and there isn't a minyan, right? Or what does a person do in specific situations with travel, with zmanim, kriya shema? How does he handle different halachic situations, right? Can a person go on vacation to a place if he knows that he's not going to be able to have a minyan? These are important questions of halacha that we need to clarify, right? As people that are involved in the realm of vacation. But there's a more fundamental question that needs to be asked, which we're doing over here, right? B'siyata d'shmaya, which is, how do we even feel about this topic? How do we feel about this topic of vacation? And as what we've seen here in PWI, right, in Work Inspired, which is our flagship here, which is that when it comes to work, this is not something which is outside of the conversation, right? It's not that there's Torah, right, and there's mitzvahs, and then there's this thing called work outside which isn't addressed. So too, right, when it comes to vacation, right, when it comes to our leisure time and what we're doing, we have to understand that it's inside of the conversation. Because just like when it comes to work, and we've said this, but we'll say it time and time again, which is that if the whole conversation is about do's and don'ts, the whole conversation is about what's permitted, what's not permitted when it comes to halacha, right? But it's something which is outside of the conversation, right, of avodas Hashem. That is where all the trouble starts when it comes to challenges that come up at work, right, or moral behavior which comes up at work. So too when it comes to vacation, right, it can't just be, right, it needs to have the aspect of halacha, the do's and the don'ts, but it can't just be about what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do, what we can find the heter for, what we can't find the heter for. Because if we do that, we're missing out at the root. We're missing out at the foundation, right, which empowers us to be able to vacation al-pi, what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. Okay, so we said that we'd start off with this question, right, which is really understanding what's underneath the question of vacation. Right, and as we discussed a few times, right, throughout our Chabura, right, the iceberg principle, right, which I learned back in my college days, but you have this, it's used a lot in marketing, right, that if you're out there on the boat, right, and you see, right, you see in your vision, right, some tip of something sticking out of the water, right, so you could say, oh, okay, we need to steer a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, so that we don't hit that and cause a collision. But if we want to be a bit more depth and smart, what we can understand is that little thing sticking out of the water is really the tip of an iceberg, right? And therefore we can't just address, right, which marketers speak about as the symptom to the problem. We can't just see poor sales. We can't just see, a decrease in revenue and say, okay, this seems to be the issue. We need to dig deep, right? The market researchers that go underwater and see, we're dealing with this size of an iceberg. We have to understand what the root of it is. And so too, when it comes to this topic of vacation, we have to understand that really this question of how we relate to, right, the Hashkafa of vacation is really a question of a Hashkafa of what I called last time downtime. But the word I like to use today as we move forward, right, in this class, right, is leisure. Right, is leisure. Because it's an interesting word. Before the class, I just wanted to Google and see some of the classical definitions used. So I saw, according to the Oxford Dictionary, leisure is defined as use of free time for enjoyment. Use of free time for enjoyment. According to the Webster Dictionary, right, this is Rishonim, Achreinim, to be medayik in the Lashonis. We don't do this in English, but just to understand, it's fascinating. According to the Webster Dictionary, we have freedom from the cessation of activities. Very, very profound. So it's it's a freedom that comes from the cessation. It sounds like Shvisa. It sounds like a little like Shabbos. I'm not really sure what the cessation of activities is. You just imagine a person sitting there just like on a beach chair, not doing anything. Perhaps not even drinking. Maybe that's an activity as well. But here we see two definitions that are used. Particularly the one in the Webster, it's interesting that this freedom that comes from cessation of activities, right? Last time we saw from the Maral, right? What does it mean to be free? Right? What does it mean to be a free person? Who is the free person? Is the Mitzayra. Right? So perhaps the person who's the leisure, if we have, we're creating an advertisement of the guy who's sitting there on that beach chair, he should have, there's white dots going all over him, because he's a Mitzayra. But we need to understand. I took a look just to see what's taking place out there. Today it's fascinating that the leisure industry is defined as recreation, sports, tourism, and entertainment. Right. So if you take this word leisure, right, which we may use, right, and just try to be able to reflect what we're speaking about, what the world's speaking about, we're talking about an industry which is a growing industry, an explosive industry of things like recreation, right, we'll speak about that more in depth, sports, right, tourism, and entertainment. And it's fascinating to recognize, right, that historically we've seen in the last 100 and so years a shift that hasn't existed, right, ever since the beginning of time, right, when it comes to leisure, right, because as it's pointed out, right, it's pointed out by the sociologists and the historians that if you take a look, there was a big shift that took place in the mid-19th century. The mid-19th century when it came to our relationship to the leisure. Before that, right, leisure activities was really something which was reserved for more of the upper class or the aristocratic people, right? If you think about, stories you may have read, about the king, who went out hunting, with all his people, and this was something which, if a person was going to be involved in leisure, right, it required having money, it required being of a certain social status, right? It took more time. Thinking about, hunting today. I know when I was a kid, who went hunting? You played duck hunt. Now, I know for many people watching or listening, you don't even know what duck hunt is. But Duck Hunt was one of the first Nintendo games. You actually had a gun. And it used to radiate lights, and you had some ducks that you had to shoot. That for me was hunting. I didn't have to be an aristocrat. Who would actually want to go out and sit there in the sun, right, and have to deal with shooting animals? I can just take my gun and shoot it. we can say, achal achas kama v'kama kavachomer shevakavachomer today, many years later, to be able to go hunting with the whole entire world of paintball, the whole entire world of, video games that make duck hunt look like we're, in the prehistoric age, VR, we're talking about a different era. And if leisure was something which wasn't relevant for the masses, right, for thousands of years, what we've seen over the last 100+ years is a total shift. Now that total shift partly is coming because of technology, right, which it used to be something which wasn't of access, right, and now everyone, can access in 3 seconds, can access leisure, right, and it's also because of marketing. It's also because of marketing, right, which, once again, we love the marketing people, but we know the marketing didn't exist the way that it's existed over the last, for sure, the last 50, 60 years, previously, right, where there's been a very big push as society, Western culture, right, has moved on some level further away from religion, bigadol, and further away from values, right? There's been a focus and a message that many of us may have grown up in, which is that we live for leisure. The whole reason why we go to work, the whole reason that we live for is so that we have that vacation, so that we're able to have that time off, so that we're able to go out and hang out with our friends, so they're able to go to the bar, a person's able to go on that vacation. That is what a person's living for. And it's because of that, it's because of this culture that's evolved around leisure, right, which we mentioned this a little bit last time, which has strengthened the kickback, right, from camp number one, because there's a certain fear, if I can say, a certain fear, right, that if that's okay, right, if leisure is okay, right, so does that mean that we're subscribing, right, to this worldview, right, which is being shot out at us, right, in every nook and cranny of our lives. So we have to understand what the Torah's view, right, of leisure is. And as we go through this, we'll open up the conversation today. We'll be continuing, B'ezras Hashem, to look through it more in depth in conversations with Rav Gerzi. You're going to notice, especially if you're a sensitive Pilzno student, right, that a lot of what we're going to be speaking about over here is overlapped with the paradigm of the Arba Yesodos, right, the Arba Yesodos, right, which was one of the foundational teachings, right, of the Pilzno Rav, right, here in Pilzno, right, it's one of the things you have to know by heart in your sleep, otherwise you can't be part of the community. Just joking. But it's an essential part of living a Jewish life. And we're going to see the overlap. So let's take a look. Let's start the conversation by taking a look at some of the favorite pastimes of leisure, of that which people do. Right, so one of the things, right, that many people do, including myself, yourself, is spending time with friends. And spending time with friends is something which, right, we've become very experienced. Right? If you have to write a resume for, our ability to hang out with friends, we've been doing it ever since we're very little. Ever since we're little children. This idea of getting together with friends, play dates, right? It starts with Lego, then we graduate a little bit more to baseball. If you live in England or some other countries, I hear they play soccer, they play football. Oh, all right, of course. I'm sorry about that. Right, football. Football, and as we go through life, right, and we get a bit older, right, we graduate from certain toys, we graduate from certain activities, we hit our teenage years, and then it becomes about, hanging out, whatever that means for you. We're just hanging out, chilling. And then at a certain age, if you're on the religious program, right, then we'd say hopefully matures. With the same friends that we used to get together with and play Legos and go out for pizzas and, throw the ball in the park. Now we can find ourselves sitting around a nice juicy daf of Gemara, right? To have a chavrusa, right? To be able to go to a kumzitz, right? To be able to connect over meaningful things. And therefore you might expect that when the Torah speaks about what friends do, that we'd find speaking about this in visionary existence of what it looks like, right? To be on the program and to have friends. Then we have this fascinating Abbas Rav Nassan. The Abbas Rav Nassan, you have it in front of you, is speaking about a very well-known Mishnah, right? And as part of the Mishnah, we're taught, right, kunalecha chaver, right, that a person should acquire for themselves a friend. So the question is that what does that mean? So take a look. If you guys have never seen this Abbas Rav Nassan before, you're going to want to take it and just post it up in front of your wall. But even if you had seen it before, I've seen it so many times. It just gives so much chizuk just seeing it. So Abbas Rav Nassan tells us, "Knalecha chaver keitzad." How do you acquire a friend? Melamed sheyikneh ha'adam chaver la'atzmai. And it's teaching us here that it's important, it's a Torah value that we should acquire friends for ourselves. Sheyoichal imai, to eat together, v'yishna imai, to drink together, right? To have a l'chaim together, v'yikra imai, v'yishna imai, to be able to read together and to be able to learn together, v'yishan imai, and to have sleepover parties together. And that each person to their friend, right, should share. But what are we sharing? We're not just sharing a vart, right? We're not just sharing something we saw in a sefer, we're not sharing a Rashi, we're not sharing a Tosfos. We're not even sharing an Arizal. Maybe. But okay, we're sharing an Arizal. That's what we do with our friends. Not to say we shouldn't share Rashi and Tosfos, but this is what he says, to share Sisrei Torah, right? The secrets of the Torah. V'steser derech eretz, this is so powerful. V'steser derech eretz is to share with your friends, share what's going on in your life. Share business tips, right? Share what's going on in your work. Share what's going on in your marriage. Share what's going on with your kids. And what this Abbas Rav Nassan is telling us, and once again, we're not talking about a modern day sefer over here, is that reflecting to us the amazing chachma of the Torah, right, of understanding the human experience. And understanding the human experience means is that the way that relationships are made, the way that friendships are made. And the Torah tells us that we should invest our time, connect, to buy something. We're not buying our friends with money, we're investing our time. And this is time that we could have been spent on learning a Rashi and learning a Tosfos, or spending time with our families, right? Or advancing ourselves in our careers. We're investing and spending our time into our friendships. And the way that those are built are by having shared experiences. Shared experience over kogel. Shared experiences over cholent. Shared experiences, right, over a l'chaim, over a beer. Sitting out in the park, listening to music together. Sharing what's going on in our lives. This is the medrash. The Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us, there's a lot of depth to this. Hopefully we'll get back to it again. But just to mention it here, the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Kuf Gimel Amid Beis, tells us it praises the drinking together. Because when we drink together, it brings people closer to each other. Which means, Torah wisdom, that if you have a friend, you want to be able to connect with somebody, you can just go and sit in a base medrash. You can sit, and that's powerful. That's powerful. Of course, it's the content of the conversation, right, which is going to direct, to speak about real things. Speak about real things. But you do that, and you add some sushi. You do that, right? You add a drink. You go out for some coffee together. There's a reality in the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu created us, that through sharing food together, that helps to bring people close together. There are other people, another favorite, pastimes that people do when it comes to leisure, right? The realm of music, right? The realm of travel, right? The realm of nature, right? Concerts, festivals, hiking, zoos, museums. So we have this teaching from the doctor, right? right? From the tzaddik and from the doctor, from the Rambam, right? Shmone Prakim, the Rambam and Per Chamishi. V'chein mishe his oira olav marashchor. You have it in front of you. If somebody finds himself in a low place, right? In that particular time of his life, right? That what's going on for him, right? That month, that week, that day, that hour, he finds himself, right? In a low state of being. Yasira mishmir, what should he do? Yasira mishmir sanigunim. So what does he do? He turns to listening to music. Uvamine zemer, different types of music, musical instruments, uvatil haganos, and to go out, right, and to be able to walk, to go to the park, go to the forest, right, to see, uvavinyanim hanoim, and to see architecture, right, to be able to, if a person, right, go, if he's inspired by seeing the tall buildings in Manhattan, okay, to go and to look and to be able to see, to get out. What the Rambam is speaking about over here, is he's saying is that there's a reality of things which impact our state of being. They create what he calls harchavas hanefesh, right? An expanded state where a person's able to function optimally. And how is that done? So a person might think if a person's having a hard time. He's having a hard time. He's having a hard time at work. He's having a hard time with a child. He's having a hard time with a friend. He's having a hard time with his finances. So go, open up a sefer, get chizuk, go speak with a rebbe. Get chizuk. The Rambam's not saying we shouldn't do that, but as part of the recipe, the Rambam says, go out, go to a concert, go listen to music, right? Go out. I'm saying go out into the wilderness, right? To go out to be able to see things that inspire you, that are able to impact you. Because what the Torah is reflecting here is that sometimes it's enough to read something, sometimes it's enough to hear something, but we also need to experience things, right? It's the difference between reading a recipe and eating the food. It's nice to read recipes, especially if you like food. It can be very exciting to read recipes. It's very exciting to read recipes, but ein doime, we can't compare what impact it's going to have reading a recipe to eating the food. To see the food, to eat the food, it's a different darga. And therefore the Torah is telling us that we have to recognize the human experience, and we have to be able to use this in a way that helps us to function optimally. And the Torah demands of us, and we're going to speak about this a lot more, but the Torah demands of us for us to be able to know who we are, and to be able to know what's important to us, to be able to know what helps us in order to be able to function. And it's so important for us here in this chabura, right, as we approach this topic, right, b'siyata d'shmaya, with a lot of sensitivity, not chas v'shalom to be mezalzel in anything, but with a lot of sensitivity to realize that the Torah thinks that this is important. Right, there's a Gemara Yerushalmi in Kedushin which requires a lot of tzarech iyun to understand. The Kedushin Dalid Yud Beis, Rabbi Chizkiah, Rav Kohen b'shem Rav. Rav Chizkiah, Rav Kohen taught in the name of Rav. Rav, who we've spoken of a lot in our Chabura. Asid Adam litain din v'cheshbon al kol ma sherata eino v'lo achal. Right, when we speak about those things that a person will have to give din v'cheshbon over, right? There are things that we're very familiar with, right? Kovei itim l'Torah, honest in business. So here's one brought in the Yerushalmi, that a person will need to give din v'cheshbon, asad adam latin din v'cheshbon, al kol ma sherata eino v'lo achal, on everything that a person's eyes saw and didn't eat. How about that one? That's like, well, wait, 1 second, rewind. Wait, what did the Yerushalmi just say? How do we understand this Yerushalmi? Okay, so I didn't eat it. Maybe it was a good thing. Maybe it was a good thing. We're going to have to get din v'cheshbon because we didn't eat something. So if we could just suggest for now, just to suggest for now, we're going to, as I said, we're going to unpackage this. Kol ma sharata einoi, that everything that my eyes saw, and what your eyes saw. I know for myself, when I go into the supermarket, my eye doesn't catch everything, right? Do I want to buy every piece of food that I see? Right? Some people go into the shop, they see the fish. Some people go into the shop, right, and they see the apples. Right? Do we flip through a vacation magazine, right? Does everyone want to go, sky glide, jump off a plane? Does everyone want to go kayaking? Does everyone want to go, Okay, there are different things. There are things that catch our eye. There are things that catch our eye. And what the Torah is telling us here, is that we need to recognize that if there are things that our eyes are catching, if there are things that we are finding ourselves attracted to, it could be we're going to have to give din v'cheshbon to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on why we didn't follow through and experience that. And this was something which was taken with tremendous sensitivity. Right? We find that tzaddikim like the Chida, right? Like tzaddikim like the Chida, right? We find that he had a diary. It's a diary in which he charted out what he did when he was traveling. And the Chida writes with tremendous detail, lines and lines and lines and lines of detail, how he traveled and he went and he went to some type of a museum, whatever was a museum in his time, where it had different artifacts, different types of soil, different bones of animals, the equivalent of what we would call today a zoo or a museum. That's where the Chida went. And the Chida writes line after line about how he saw this, he was fascinated. And to see the descriptive words of this tzaddik, who not only went to see it, but also spent the time to write it, how much it was mashpia on him. And we know many people are familiar with the story of Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, right, that in his later years when he went and he made the journey, right, the plan to go see the Swiss Alps, and they asked him, L'chvod Rav, this is what you're doing. Right, and Rav Hirsch said, he said, I'll be honest with you. Is that after 120, right, when I go up to Shemayim, right, he felt that these years were moving on, he'd say, I'm going to be asked, did you see my Swiss Alps? So does that mean that I need to go to the Swiss Alps? Does that mean that you need to go to the Swiss Alps? It's definitely good for the marketing campaign Vacations to the Swiss Alps. They haven't yet marketed this story. But what we see is that if there's something that's catching your eye, and there's something that speaks to you, and there's something that you feel drawn towards, there's something that helps you, the Torah wants us to understand, that it's important. So it's important. So way before the aristocrats, were going out with their carriages and their arm bearers and their arrows and whatever else, the kings and the knights were doing in the medieval times of what they were doing for leisure. Right? The Torah related to this reality of the fact, right, that we do have these activities, and there's something which are important. Everyone should have a good day, and B'ezras Hashem, looking forward to continue to unpackage this, and we're going to spend time, each one in our own way, to be able to understand how we can relate to these different activities that we're drawn towards and be able to use them in the best way.